Christopher felt the floor shift. He had always believed he didn't need anyone, least of all a woman like Sarah who quietly hovered in the background. But now that she was gone, the silence screamed. The world she had kept perfectly balanced was falling apart piece by piece. He tried to focus, to fix things, to delegate, but it didn't work. Because the truth was, Sarah didn't just manage his tasks. She managed him. She was the filter between his chaos and the world's expectations, and now that filter was gone. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would do anything to get her back. 3 days passed before Christopher built up the courage to go to her apartment. He didn't send flowers, didn't call ahead, didn't draft a long email. He knew better now. Sarah wasn't the kind of woman you wooed with cliches. She deserved truth. She deserved action. So he stood outside her modest flat in Yaba, holding a small bouquet of wild daisies, the same ones she used to keep in a jar beside her desk every Monday. They looked a little limp in his hand, but he clutched them anyway, his palms sweating. He knocked once, twice. When she opened the door, she was barefoot, wearing a simple tank top and joggers, her hair wrapped in a scarf. And still, she looked like the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Christopher?" she asked, brows furrowed. "I'm sorry," he blurted. She blinked. He raised the flowers like a white flag. "I didn't know where to start, so I just started." Sarah stood silently, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" "Because everything's falling apart without you," he admitted. "The company's a mess, I'm a mess, and—" He swallowed. "I finally realized why." She didn't move. "Because your assistant quit?" "No," he said quickly. "Because I lost you." Her eyes narrowed. "You never had me." His throat tightened. Sarah James wasn't just another name on the payroll at Blake Enterprises. She was the engine, the pulse, the quiet storm that made everything move. At 27, with her soft brown eyes, coiled hair tucked into a low bun, and a calm voice that never broke under pressure, she was known to all as Boss Blake's girl, but not the kind of girl you'd think. She wasn't on his arm at events, nor in his bed. She was the one behind the scenes, making the empire run. Every morning, Sarah arrived at the office before the sun broke the sky. She'd unlock his office, arrange his files in order of urgency, review his calendar, and prep his herbal tea just the way he liked it. Strong, no sugar, a squeeze of lemon. She knew when his mom's doctor's appointments were due, reminded him of his father's golf tournament schedules, and even handled RSVPs to birthday parties of friends he barely remembered existed. And he never said thank you. Not once. Christopher Blake, 35, brilliant, brutally handsome, and emotionally unavailable, never spared Sarah more than a nod or grunt. He moved like the world owed him everything and treated her like a convenience. His phone calls were curt, his replies often laced with irritation, and his expectations were sky high. "Reschedule my 4 p.m. I need a break between the board meeting and my dinner with shareholders," he barked one morning, not even looking up from his laptop. "It's already done," Sarah replied softly. He didn't respond. It wasn't just that he was rude. It was the way he acted, like her presence was part of the furniture. Like she existed solely to make his life easier. And yet, Sarah loved him. She didn't know when it started. Maybe it was that day he told off a partner who insulted a janitor, or the night he personally called the mother of an intern who'd fallen sick. It was those fleeting moments that revealed a man beneath the arrogance, a man she wanted to know more. But he never gave her that chance. Sarah knew everything about Christopher, from his allergy to strawberries, to the fact that he watched replays of old Arsenal matches when he was stressed. She handled his chaos without complaint. She once flew overnight to Abuja just to deliver a contract he had forgotten to sign. She skipped her own birthday party to stay late at the office while he wooed a new woman at a rooftop bar in Victoria Island. Everyone around her wondered why she stayed. why she put up with a man who didn't even ask how she was doing. But Sarah smiled through it all. She loved him, foolishly perhaps. But she hoped one day he'd see her, not just as an employee, but as a woman. The woman. Her friends called her delusional. "He'll never look your way," her roommate Lola said one evening. "You're his shadow. He doesn't even know what life looks like in your direction." Sarah didn't argue. She didn't defend him. Deep down, she knew Lola was right. But her heart was stubborn, and love, real love, was never logical. That Friday, after working a 12-hour shift organizing a last-minute trip to London for Christopher and yet another girlfriend, Sarah stood outside the building, exhausted but oddly content. Her phone buzzed. "Chris, you forgot to confirm the dinner reservation for tomorrow." Her eyes narrowed. She had confirmed it twice. Still, she replied quickly, "Confirmed. It's in your calendar." No reply. Sarah sighed and slipped her phone into her purse. As her Uber pulled up, she caught her reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, smudged lipstick, and a weariness that clung to her like perfume. She chuckled bitterly. "Behind every great man," she whispered, "is a woman he never notices." But she didn't know that one day soon, that same man would feel the earth tilt without her, that her quiet love, her steady presence, was the very thing holding his world together. And when she walked away, everything he built would crumble like sand. Saturdays were supposed to be for rest, but for Sarah James, they were another version of the weekdays, just quieter and more emotionally draining. Instead of juggling boardroom schedules and contract reviews, she was planning date night surprises and curating luxury gift baskets for women she'd never met but already disliked. Christopher had a type, gorgeous, shallow, and uninterested in who he truly was. They liked the lifestyle, the expensive dinners at Sky Lounge, the Cartier bracelets, and the private jets. They liked being shown off, and Christopher obliged, showering them with everything, except love. Sarah watched it all unfold from the sidelines, booked the spa appointments, ordered the dresses, handled the awkward returns when one of the girlfriends didn't like the color. She'd pretend it didn't sting. But deep down, every little task was like rubbing salt into an invisible wound. He had sent flowers to his latest girlfriend, Amira. Sarah picked out the arrangement herself, orchids and peonies and soft pinks, just like Amira's Instagram aesthetic. When she saw Christopher smile at the delivery photo Amira posted online, her heart sank. He never smiled like that at her. She made a habit of burying those feelings. She'd tell herself it was just work, that she was being dramatic, that one day someone else would love her like she loved Christopher. But those lies were wearing thin. Late one evening, Christopher had stayed behind in the office, pacing while talking on the phone. Sarah lingered, pretending to finish up some reports just to watch him move, tired, frustrated, but still so painfully beautiful. He ended the call with a huff, running a hand through his hair. "Useless. She forgot our anniversary." Sarah looked up. "Anniversary? Amira, 3 months." She bit her tongue. 3 months and she already forgot? Sarah had reminded him of the date just that morning, planned the dinner, and even picked up the custom perfume with their initials engraved on the bottle. But Amira? She hadn't even texted. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice gentle. He nodded. "You'd think with all I do..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Anyway, I've got the dinner sorted." "You'll still go?" she asked. He shrugged. "What else is there to do?" Sarah nodded slowly, trying not to let her disappointment show. She didn't understand why he kept chasing women who gave so little in return, while she stood there ready to offer everything, and yet invisible. That night she walked home instead of calling an Uber. The city was loud, but her heart was louder. It screamed at her to let go, but her mind whispered, "He'll see you one day." The truth was, Sarah didn't want the gifts or the trips. She didn't want the limelight. She just wanted to be chosen, to be seen, to be loved, not for what she did, but for who she was. The next week, Amira visited the office. Sarah had to welcome her and offer her coffee, like a hostess in her own heartbreak. Amira walked around with the air of someone who didn't need to try hard. She flirted with the interns, took selfies near the office window, and barely acknowledged Sarah. "She's cute," Amira said offhandedly to Christopher while nodding at Sarah. "Is she your secretary or something?" Before Sarah could answer, Christopher said, "She's just the one who makes sure I don't burn down the building." They laughed. Sarah didn't. She excused herself and locked herself in the washroom, staring at her reflection until the tears dried up on their own. She had grown used to the jokes, the jabs, the disregard, but every time he laughed with someone else at her expense, it chipped at her pride. She wasn't weak, she wasn't small, she had value, whether Christopher saw it or not. Later that evening, while cleaning out her inbox, Sarah found an old photo of Christopher smiling, genuinely smiling, with his arm around a woman who wasn't a girlfriend. It was his mother, the only woman he ever looked at with true affection. Sarah stared at the image, wondering what it must feel like to be on the receiving end of that gaze. To be important, not just useful. With a sigh, she filed the image away into a folder labeled, "Private Keep Hidden." She shut down her computer, stood up, and looked around the office that had become a second home. A space filled with invisible labor, unseen love, and quiet sacrifice. But a storm was coming. And soon Christopher Blake would learn what it meant to lose the one person who kept the shadows from swallowing him whole. Mondays always came heavy at Blake Enterprises, but this one felt particularly dense. Sarah sat at her desk, eyes glued to her screen, pretending not to feel the tension creeping beneath her skin. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, sending confirmation emails, reviewing legal memos, and adjusting Christopher's calendar for the fifth time that morning because he had decided, last minute as always, to shift his strategy meeting. She heard the familiar sound of his footsteps before she saw him. Polished Oxfords on the marble floor, quick, deliberate. "Where's the report from Brand Alliance?" His voice was sharp, colder than usual. Sarah turned to him calmly. "It's on your desk, sir. I printed and emailed it this morning." He didn't acknowledge the answer. Instead, he walked into his office, leaving the door slightly ajar. Seconds later, a paper hit the floor. "I said I wanted the version with the projections for Q3, not this recycled nonsense." Sarah inhaled deeply, then rose. She walked in, picked up the report silently, and handed him the correct one, already prepared and paper-clipped on the left corner. "This is the file you asked for, Christopher. You left it under the others." He snatched it, not meeting her eyes. "Fine, that's better." Not a thank you, not even a nod. She stood there for a second longer than usual, waiting for something. Anything. A flicker of appreciation. A moment of recognition. But all she got was silence. As she turned to leave, he added, "Next time, be clearer in your filing. You waste my time." She didn't answer, not because she agreed, but because anything she said would only sound like begging. And she was done begging for scraps of kindness. Back at her desk, Sarah clenched her jaw, trying to hold in the sting that rose in her throat. He had once praised a client's dog more than he had ever praised her. She had been humiliated before, but somehow every time it came from him, it hurt differently. Deeper, like a bruise layered on top of an old one. She didn't tell anyone what it felt like working under him. There was no point. Outsiders would just say she should leave. But how do you walk away from someone you love, even if they keep wounding you with every word? That afternoon, Christopher's girlfriend showed up again, this time unannounced. Amira swept through the lobby like a tropical storm, her heels clicking loudly, her perfume overpowering. "Where's Chris?" she asked Sarah, tossing her hair back. "In a board call. He'll be out shortly." Amira scoffed. "He's always busy." Sarah smiled tightly. "He's running a company." "Barely," Amira muttered under her breath before pulling out her phone to take another mirror selfie. Sarah watched her, amused. The woman barely knew what Christopher's middle name was, yet she had access to his weekends, his penthouse, his softer side. Or at least the version of him that wore smiles and gave compliments, the side Sarah had never met. Christopher stepped out moments later. "You're early," he said to Amira, his voice softening instantly. She pouted. I missed you. He smiled, a real one, the kind that used to make Sarah's heart stumble. Christopher's gaze barely drifted to Sarah as Amira looped her arms around his. We'll be heading out, he said dismissively. Sarah nodded and returned to her screen, trying not to let the sharp sting of exclusion show on her face. She heard the laughter trail behind them as they walked toward the elevator, Christopher chuckling at something silly Amira said. She blinked hard and focused on her work. But deep in her chest, something tightened. That evening, as the office grew quiet and the sky outside turned the color of rust, Sarah gathered her things. Her handbag felt heavier than usual, though she knew it wasn't the contents. It was the weight of being unseen. The weight of always being useful, but never being loved. She paused at the elevator, glanced back at the glowing doors of his office, and whispered to herself, You deserve more than this. The words hung in the silence. And though she didn't yet know when or how, those 5 words would soon change everything. The air in the Blake Enterprises rooftop lounge was thick with laughter, perfume, and expensive cologne. Golden lanterns glowed softly overhead, casting warm light across the dark marble floors and modern glass rails that overlooked the glittering Lagos skyline. It was Friday night, another of Christopher Blake's exclusive networking soirees. Except, it had very little to do with networking. The guest list was mostly models, influencers, and business acquaintances who only cared about champagne and taking selfies near the company logo. Sarah stood in the far corner, wearing a fitted black dress that still felt too formal for someone whose job was to manage logistics and make everyone else look good. She didn't want to be there, but Christopher had insisted she attend, just in case something needs fixing, he had said. She had already fixed 3 scheduled mix-ups, 1 wine spill, and 2 incorrect name tags. Her feet hurt, her head throbbed, and yet she stayed, because that was what she always did, stay for him. Christopher arrived late, as usual, wearing a navy blue blazer and that smug confidence that made women swarm him. And tonight, on his arm, was Amira. Again. She wore red silk and towering heels, smiling like she owned the building. Her laugh rang out too loudly, and her eyes didn't linger long on anyone, except herself, in any available reflective surface. Oh, Sarah saw them across the room, sipping wine and entertaining a group of influencers. She kept her eyes on her phone, pretending to scroll through emails, until Christopher's voice rang out, sharp and clear. Sarah! She startled slightly and looked up. He was motioning for her to come closer. She walked over quietly. Yes, sir? Amira giggled, looking her up and down. Sir? Isn't that a bit formal for someone who practically lives at his office? Christopher smirked. She likes to play Secretary of the Year. Always proper. There was a pause. Then Amira chimed in. Oh, so she's your life manager too? Like your calendar, your dry cleaning, and your mummy's birthday reminders? Everyone laughed. Sarah froze. Christopher didn't correct her. In fact, he doubled down. She even reminds me when to breathe. The group erupted in laughter. Sarah forced a smile. Something about it all felt like acid on her skin, humiliation wrapped in casual cruelty. And suddenly she laughed too, softly, almost sarcastically. Because in that moment, something inside her snapped. Something small but vital. A dam broke. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The man she had loved for 3 years. The man she had protected, supported, saved more times than she could count. And here he was, mocking her in front of strangers, in front of a woman who couldn't tell the difference between an email and a press release. He didn't just disregard her. He degraded her. That was when she knew it was over. No grand speech, no dramatic tears. Just truth as cold and steady as the Lagos wind sweeping across the rooftop. Sarah turned, walked back to her corner, picked up her bag, and calmly exited the event. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back. And when she stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, her breath came out in a shudder. But her eyes stayed dry. She didn't cry, because the pain had already dried up. Back at her apartment, Sarah sat in the dark for a long time, still dressed, still in heels, replaying every moment in her mind. Not out of regret, but out of clarity. She had spent years loving a man who had no idea how to love. She had watched him give diamonds to women who never stayed, while she gave him devotion he never earned. But tonight, he broke the last piece of her. And for once, she didn't feel sorry for herself. She felt free. The next morning, before dawn broke over the lagoon, Sarah drafted her resignation letter. It was short, polite, and final. She didn't explain, because some exits don't need closure. They just need strength. Monday came like thunder, loud, messy, and completely offbeat. Christopher Blake walked into the office expecting his usual rhythm. Coffee on his desk, a detailed itinerary on his screen, and Sarah's steady presence already anticipating his every need. But his desk was bare. No tea, no printed reports, no Sarah. At first he thought she was late. A rare occurrence, but not impossible. "Where's Sarah?" he asked one of the junior staff as he passed the bullpen. "She resigned, sir," the guy said, eyes wide. "On Saturday. Sent it directly to HR." Christopher froze mid-stride. Resigned? The word tasted foreign in his mouth. He marched straight to his office, slammed the door behind him, and pulled up his email. There it was. Subject: formal resignation, body. Effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you the best. Sarah James. That was it. No emotion, no explanation, no call, no fight, no warning. Just gone. He sat back, stunned. 10 minutes later, his assistant for the day knocked. "Sir, you missed your 8 a.m. call with the investors in Berlin, and the 9 a.m. brief with marketing is still waiting." He blinked. "What 8 a.m. call?" "It was on your calendar." Christopher opened his digital planner and groaned. The call was listed, but the link wasn't. Sarah used to handle those tiny things. She'd send him reminders 15 minutes before, walk into his office with notes, and cue him in just as the call began. Now, nothing worked. That day, 3 calls were missed, 2 files misplaced, and he forgot to take his blood pressure medication before lunch. By 4 p.m., a key partner called to cancel their deal due to communication delays. Christopher felt the floor shift. He had always believed he didn't need anyone, least of all a woman like Sarah who quietly hovered in the background. But now that she was gone, the silence screamed. The world she had kept perfectly balanced was falling apart piece by piece. He tried to focus, to fix things, to delegate, but it didn't work. Because the truth was, Sarah didn't just manage his tasks. She managed him. She was the filter between his chaos and the world's expectations, and now that filter was gone. That evening, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone home, staring at the framed photo on his shelf. A company gala from 2 years ago. He was laughing in the picture, unaware that just behind him, Sarah was standing with her clipboard, unnoticed as always. He had never once appreciated her, not when she stayed late without being asked, not when she flew across the country to deliver contracts he forgot, not even when she covered for his lapses, his arrogance, his carelessness. Now he realized he hadn't just lost a secretary, he had lost his anchor. Christopher leaned back in his chair, the office bathed in the fading glow of dusk. He should have been home, perhaps getting ready for another soulless dinner with Amira, or drafting an apology to a client he had forgotten to call. Instead, he sat in the silence that used to comfort him, now suffocating. He picked up his phone and opened his contacts. His thumb hovered over Sarah's name. He had called her for everything, rescheduling meetings, handling his family, managing his life. But tonight, he didn't even know what to say. "I miss you. I messed up. Please come back." He put the phone down without dialing. No text, no call, no apology could undo what he'd broken. Sarah had given him her time, her loyalty, and maybe even her heart, and he had thrown it away with laughter and cruelty in front of strangers. Now all he had was a calendar full of missed calls and a heart full of regret. For the first time in a long time, Christopher Blake didn't feel powerful. He felt lost. Christopher didn't return home that Monday night. He drove aimlessly through the streets of Ikoyi, past the glittering lights of luxury apartments, past restaurants he'd once frequented with dates he no longer remembered. The city that had always felt like his playground now seemed hollow. He ended up at a roadside suya spot in Lekki, still in his suit, hunched over a steaming plate of meat and onions, ignoring the curious stares. He didn't care. He just needed to feel something real, because nothing felt right without her. It had been only 2 days since Sarah left, but her absence wasn't just noticeable, it was all-consuming. The office was a mess, his appointments were jumbled, and his thoughts were worse. He couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. The morning after her resignation, he showed up at the office earlier than usual. Not because he had anything urgent, but because he kept expecting to see her. He found a stranger at her desk. The new assistant, temporary, was a disaster. She mixed up email threads, forgot to include attachments, and booked him on 2 overlapping calls. And worst of all, she kept asking him questions Sarah would have answered before he even asked. He snapped by noon. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pacing his office. She left like it was nothing. He stopped by the window and looked out at the Lagos skyline, heart pounding. Except, she didn't leave like it was nothing. She had stayed through years of disregard, of disrespect, of silence. And he had laughed at her, in public. He still remembered that rooftop. He remembered the way she stood still for a second too long after the insult, the way she gave a bitter chuckle and walked away. There were no tears, no yelling, no drama, just quiet dignity. And that haunted him more than any explosion ever could. That afternoon, Christopher went home and opened the small safe under his bookshelf. Inside were old hard drives, forgotten documents, and the framed thank you card Sarah had once written him on his birthday 2 years ago. "Thank you for trusting me with your vision. I promise to always do my part to make it shine." She had included a mug too. It read, "Blake's Backbone." He never used it. It still sat in the office kitchen, untouched. Now he held the card in his hands and realized she meant every word. While he gave his attention to women who only saw him as a paycheck, Sarah gave him loyalty. She gave him structure. She gave him peace. And he gave her nothing. Christopher dropped onto the couch, exhausted by the weight of his own foolishness. It wasn't just that Sarah made his life easier. She made it meaningful. She had been there through everything, and not once had he asked how she was doing. Not once had he shown her she mattered. He had built an empire on her shoulders and mocked her in front of strangers. He had been blind. He rubbed his hands over his face and whispered aloud, "God, what have I done?" Later that night, he opened his phone and scrolled through their old messages. "Sarah, boardroom at 10. You've got 9 minutes, sir." "Sarah, don't forget your mom's anniversary is this Friday. Already sent the flowers." "Sarah, please don't skip your meds today. I left them on your desk." "Sarah, you'll be okay. You always are." Each message was like a blade, gentle but cutting. She had loved him, hadn't she? Not loudly, not obviously, but in the small things. The way that lasts. The realization hit him hard. He hadn't just lost an assistant. He had lost the one person who cared. And now he wasn't sure she'd ever forgive him. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would do anything, anything, to get her back. 3 days passed before Christopher built up the courage to go to her apartment. He didn't send flowers, didn't call ahead, didn't draft a long email. He knew better now. Sarah wasn't the kind of woman you wooed with cliches. She deserved truth. She deserved action. So he stood outside her modest flat in Yaba, holding a small bouquet of wild daisies, the same ones she used to keep in a jar beside her desk every Monday. They looked a little limp in his hand, but he clutched them anyway, his palms sweating. He knocked once, twice. When she opened the door, she was barefoot, wearing a simple tank top and joggers, her hair wrapped in a scarf. And still, She looked like the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Christopher?" she asked, brows furrowed. "I'm sorry," he blurted. She blinked. He raised the flowers like a white flag. "I didn't know where to start, so I just started." Sarah stood silently, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" "Because everything's falling apart without you," he admitted. "The company's a mess, I'm a mess, and—" He swallowed. "I finally realized why." She didn't move. "Because your assistant quit?" "No," he said quickly. "Because I lost you." Her eyes narrowed. "You never had me." His throat tightened. "I know." She stepped back slightly. "You came all the way here just to say that?" "No," he said softly. "I came because I miss you, because I need you. Not just in my office, but in my life." Sarah crossed her arms again, this time tighter. "You humiliated me, Christopher, in front of people who didn't even know my name. You laughed. You made me a joke." His voice dropped. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I was arrogant, blind. I thought, if I ignored how important you were to me, I wouldn't lose control. But I lost you anyway." The silence between them swelled, heavy and unforgiving. He looked down at the flowers. "These are for you, not to win you back, but because they reminded me of you. Soft, strong, and easy to miss if you're not paying attention." She took them slowly without a word. He took that as hope. "I've been going through our old messages," he continued, "the ones where you reminded me to take care of myself. And I realized you were always taking care of me, but I never took care of you." Sarah's eyes glistened. "I don't expect you to forgive me tonight," he added quickly, "but I just needed to say this. To your face. You were never invisible to me, Sarah. I was just too much of a coward to admit how much I depended on you." She stared at him, unmoving. Then quietly, she stepped aside. He walked in. For the first time in weeks, he breathed. They sat at her tiny kitchen table. No wine, no grand gestures, just two people finally meeting each other, without the mask of titles or power. "I don't trust you yet," she said honestly, fingers resting on the vase. "I don't blame you," he whispered, "but I do believe you're trying." He looked into her eyes. "I'll keep trying, every day." And for the first time since she walked out of that rooftop party, Sarah smiled. It wasn't a full smile, but it was a start. 3 months later, Christopher Blake stood in the newly renovated conference room of Blake Enterprises, staring out at the Lagos skyline with his hands in his pockets. The company was back on the track. No, better, because he was different. It showed in the little things. He came in on time. He now said thank you, he listened, and more importantly, he made space for people, for ideas, for grace. And it had everything to do with Sarah James. She hadn't returned to her old role. That chapter was closed. Instead, she'd launched her own consultancy, SJ Executive Solutions, and was already being sought after by top firms for her skill in managing high-stakes leadership logistics. Her genius was finally front and center, and the world was seeing what he'd taken for granted. But even more than her brilliance, she had given him something rare. A second chance. Christopher glanced at his watch. It was nearly 6 p.m., the time he'd set for their monthly dinner, a new tradition she'd agreed to. They weren't officially dating, not yet, but there was something deeply sacred about rebuilding their relationship from scratch, layer by honest layer. She arrived a few minutes later, wearing a crisp white blouse tucked into indigo jeans, her curls cascading down her back. She looked radiant, confident, whole. "Hope I'm not late," she said, stepping into the room with her usual calm. He smiled. "You're right on time, as always." She set her purse down and raised a brow. "So what's tonight's theme? Apology number 57? He chuckled. "Nope, gratitude. I've moved to that stage now." They sat across from each other at the table he'd had set up with her favorite dishes: jollof rice, grilled prawns, and peppered snails. She noticed immediately. "You remembered the snails?" I pay attention now, he said with a wink. She smiled despite herself, then took a bite. So, how's the new assistant? Christopher groaned. Efficient. A little scared of me, though. As she should be, Sarah teased. You were a menace. He looked at her seriously. I was worse than a menace, Sarah. I was unkind, and I never want to be that man again. Her expression softened. You've grown. I had to, he said quietly. Losing you showed me everything I never knew I needed. The room grew still, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. I used to think strength meant being in control all the time, he said, but the strongest I've ever felt was when I admitted I needed you. She looked at him, eyes thoughtful. I don't want to control you, he continued. I don't want to own you or tie you down. I just want the honor of walking beside you. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small white envelope. She slid it across the table. He opened it, confused. It was a framed quote that read, Some people wait their whole lives to be seen, and then one day, someone finally looks. He swallowed hard. That's beautiful. It reminded me of you, she said softly. The version of you I see now. The one who sees me too. There were no dramatic kisses, no sweeping declarations. Just quiet understanding. A shared gaze. The moment when two people choose each other, not out of desperation, but out of recognition. She stood to leave and he walked her to the door. Will I see you next month? He asked. She turned. Maybe sooner. I haven't decided yet. He grinned. I'll wait. She nodded once, then stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, he exhaled, grateful, humbled, and utterly in love. Because he knew now, without a doubt, Sarah James wasn't the girl he ignored. She was the woman he'd never stop chasing.